Good? Okay, very good. Thank you so much for everyone for attending the third uh, episode, I guess we can call it, of this series of trying to look into things that used to be very much part and parcel of our religion, of Yiddishkeit. Every week we look at different things which used to be very much part of the fabric of our religion, or our culture, or practices, and no longer are. So it's kind of a nostalgic look at things that used to be that aren't as present as they used to be. And this week we have a good friend and a colleague of mine, Rabbi Edery, who, as you know, is the rabbi down here at the Sephardic Minyane at TBDJ. And I want to take a moment just to appreciate how unique this is, how we have a minyan upstairs, Ashkenaz, minyan downstairs, Sephardic, and we talk to each other, we're friendly, right? Not just on camera, but off camera, we're good friends. And we share opportunities to teach Torah hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder. So that's something that's very unique to TBDJ, something we're proud of. It's not by accident. It's very intentional, and I look forward to continuing many years of nurturing and developing this relationship between both sides of Klal Yisrael under one roof. Without further ado, Rabbi Michal Edery.
All right, good evening, everyone. Very happy to be here. You will excuse me just a second. I just need to put my record on here.
Recording in progress.
All right, now this we could start. Okie dokie. Okay, so as Rabbi Kleiman just mentioned, it's actually like a consequence of the exile, really, when you think about it. But many things disappeared and are not applicable nowadays. Some of them because the Beit HaMikdash is not around, and many laws that were related to the Beit HaMikdash and to the service of the Beit HaMikdash to start with. But we see already that the Chachamim, our Rabbanim, throughout history, were very concerned about that. And what they did, even though some of the rules are not even applicable, they kept us doing certain things in order for us never to forget that there was such a thing. For example, if you take Netilat Yadayim that we do before washing the hand, before eating bread, it's really something that's related to the Truma, to eating the portion of the crops that were given to Kohanim, and we had strict rules when it came to that. We had to eat them betahara, meaning we had to be in a pure state. So they made up a rule that even though no one is really like concerned nowadays by purity or impurity, because there's no red cow, there's no paraduma, we don't have a Bet HaMikdash, unfortunately, but yet they made up those rules, and they asked us to pay attention like this whenever Be'ezrat Hashem, Bimhera B'yaminu, the Bet HaMikdash comes right away, we're already ready. You find also some Doile Acharonim, like for example, Rabbi Israel Meir HaKohen, the Chafetz Chaim, the Mishnah Brura. He made sure that in Eretz Israel, from his time already, there were Kolelim that were being busy just learning on Seder Kochim and knowing exactly what to do when Mashiach comes. Kohanim will have crash courses of how to do all kind of avodot and sacrifices that were related to the Beit HaMikdash. And they paid attention to that because they knew that if you do not teach or promote those kind of things, then tend to be forgotten. So they made in place certain systems in order that things will get... Maimonides, best example you could find. Because of the book, all of the book of halacha that you find nowadays, whether it's the Rosh, the Tur, or the Shulchan Aruch, they're only dealing with topics and matters that pertains to nowadays. The only one that codified everything, going from rules of the paraduma, the rules of the stains of leprosies, the rules of kochim, the sacrifices, and everything is written in a book well organized, was the Rambam. And he did that because he knew after the galut, after the exile, and because we're not exposed on a daily basis to those kind of things are going to tend to disappear. So Rabbi Kleiman is following the same path, I guess, because coming with such an idea of working out and bringing sessions to make people aware of the kind of things that we used to have and the way we're proceeding in protocol nowadays. It's very important, and gives us like a glimpse of what we had. So what we're going to discuss today is the way the court were organized, and the way we modified a little bit the protocol and the kind of things we could judge, we can't judge, based on the fact that we were in exile, we lost a lot of knowledge, we lost a lot of practices, and the Bati Dinim, the rabbinical courts, are not any exceptions to the rules. So I'm going to start with the famous Mishnah. Those that are learning the Daf Yomi, they know about it. It's one of the longest Mishnah we have in the Talmud. It's in Masechet Sanhedrin. And the Mishnah starts, it's a whole page, one Mishnah that takes the whole page. It's pretty rare. And what you have there, you have the way the court were organized. So as you know, an interesting fact, there's no lawyers in rabbinical court. It does not exist. There's no such a thing. And one of the reasons that are being given is that there's no bigger bias than to pay someone to defend you, to prosecute someone. Think about it. It's very... Now, what the non-Jewish world and the non-Jewish judicial system is doing is that they assume that if one side brings a lawyer and the other one brings another lawyer, it's fair, even though it's biased from mitchilato, from the beginning, but at least they have an equal treatment, so it's kind of fair in a certain way. By Torah law, it doesn't work like this. By Torah law, you could have someone that we call a to'en, someone that could come and help someone build up his argument or presenting the argument to a judge, but someone that will defend you or that will engage in prosecution against someone that you'll never find. So how does that work? Well, the Dayanim themselves, they'll split, and you have different ways of organizing the different courts. And it's always with odd numbers. You can understand easily why, because at the end of the game, there's going to be a vote. And if you end up with avec un nombre pair, like they say in French, then you're going to have a problem, because you're never going to be able to take a proper decision. So the way it goes is that the Dayanim will split themselves. Some of them will be engaged into the defense. Some of them will be engaged into the prosecution, and they will deal with the case. And of course, as you know, there are many very strict rules that you find of how a Dayan should act. I'll give you just a glimpse of a few rules, just for you to understand how it is important to be ethical and not chas v'shalom to bend or to try to change any kind or anything that has to do with favoritism in the case itself. So as an example, a Dayan is not supposed to listen to one of the parts without the presence of the other. He's not allowed to have a private meeting with one of the parts before. That doesn't make sense. He's not allowed to judge a case if he knows one of the persons. There's even a famous case in, I believe it's in Masechet Kiddushin. There was a man that wanted to be judged by a very important and iconic rabbi in the Talmud called Mar Zutcha. And he traveled for a long time. At this time, no train, nothing. It was like a few days just to get to the city, because he knew that Mar Zutcha was an expert on the case that he needed. And without knowing it, the first person he bumps in when he comes to the city, it's Mar Zutcha, but he doesn't know it. And Mar Zutcha had the cane because he was a pretty old man. The cane fell, and the man picked up the cane, gave it to Mar Zutcha, and asked him, "Do you know who's Mar Zutcha? Where can I find him?" And Mar Zutcha gave him an address, so he didn't have any GPS or anything. Imagine, he had to go to the city without knowing where he was. And he went there, and when the guy opened the door, who does he find? Mar Zutcha. And Mar Zutcha tells him, "I'm sorry, but I cannot judge the case." And the man is like, "Come on, I traveled like a few days just to see you." I say, "But I can't." I say, "Why?" I say, "Because you did a favor for me. You give me my cane." And the guy was like, "Come on. Just for that?" Said, "Yes, just for that." And he gave them an address for another Dayan that will deal with the case. But what's interesting is that the Gemara is saying right after that Mar Zutcha of curiosity went in the back of the court. And behind the wall, behind a window, he was watching the actual court case that was happening. And the Gemara says he surprised himself defending the person that gave him the cane, because it's a nature of a human being. You do me a favor, if I'm a makir tova, I'm going to recognize the good that you did for me, then whether I like it or not, I'm going to be biased because of that. So he refused to judge him. So back to the Mishnah here. What do we have? Dine mamonot bishlosha. When you're dealing with what we call in Quebec, la cour des petites créances. You know what is that? It means it's a court that deal with monetary issue, business issues, but there's a limit to it. I believe in Quebec, like if you go over $10,000, you cannot bring the case there. I don't know if I'm, I don't remember the exact amount, but in the Talmud they call it dine mamonot. So dine mamonot, 3 dayanim, 3 judges, okay? Gezelot chabalot, cases of robberies or cases of what we call in French, coup et blessure. You know what is that? It's when someone gets hit and gets physically damaged by someone else. Also 3 dayanim. And the Mishnah is going all the way down and bringing all kind of cases. And you see that there's no lawyers, that's the way it's working. And depending on the case that we're dealing with, you're going to have a number of dayanim which is set aside halacha Moshe Sinai that we learn from Psukim and from Kabbalah, meaning not mystical thing. Kabbalah means that it's a tradition that was passed on from Moshe Rabbeinu to everyone else. So as an example, there's an interesting case here where you see Ibur HaChodesh, for example, when you decide to add a month in the year. So there's an argument in the Mishnah, some say 3, some say you start with 3, you debate with 5, and you conclude with 7. But it's always an odd number like this. Whenever they're going to take a decision, they're going to be able to vote, and they're going to have a majority. And majority here doesn't have to be a vast majority. 1 extra dayan is sufficient to deal with the case. Then the Mishnah goes on and explains that when it comes to homicides and criminal cases, assassination, kind of things like this, any kind of deviant crime, 23 judges this time. And extra important subject, 71 judges, which is the maximum judges you could find in a court. And for 71, the Mishnah gives example. For example, let's say if a king wants to declare war on a neighboring country, cannot do that alone. The great Sanhedrin in Jerusalem has to sit down, and it's everyone on board, it's full house, like they say. They're all gonna come, they're all gonna debate, they're all gonna assess the situation, but it's 71 judges. Okay? So, at the time of the Talmud, the rabbinical court had authority to do whatever they wanted. They could have put someone in excommunication, they could jail someone, they could force all kind of pressure. Till nowadays it could happen for cases of act of divorces when there's like real troubles. It's possible sometimes to do that. But they had full authority to do whatever was needed in order to enforce the law and to make sure that it was applicable properly. Now the problem, as you can imagine, we went out of Eretz Israel close to 19 centuries. It's been 75 years that we went back. It's something that should never been heard of. Having a nation that kept the tradition, their identity, the name, everything they used to do, and they never gave up on going back in the land. And they got back in the land. I think the actual number is 1878 years after being exiled. So it took us 1800 years and 78 years to have a sovereign Jewish government in Eretz Israel, which is a peleplane when you think about it. It's a miracle on its own. So anyways, what did we do during the exile, and what's happening right now even in Eretz Israel? Because unfortunately, we don't have like a Talmudic kind of court, or we have rabbinical court that administrates and deals with certain matters, but like when it comes to homicides and criminology and all kind of things, it's not a Sanhedrin that deals with that. You have like a regular like court that deal with that. So what I'm going to do is like this. I'm going to show you a few technical rules, and we're going to see exactly what was the adaptation that we went through in order to go through the time of the exile, and what could we do nowadays. What is the limit of our reinforcement and the limit of the pressures, and also you're going to see are we limited to deal and to judge certain cases nowadays? And obviously, you know that the answer is yes. You go, for example, to the MK, to the Beit here in Montreal. There are certain cases that they could deal with when it comes to business matters. But even to reinforce the law, they cannot do anything unless the two parts that are like in argument, unless they sign a paper where they say and they commit that whatever the rabbis are going to decide, we're going to follow it by law. And in case one of the parts doesn't want to follow whatever the decision of the dayanim were, that paper could be used to reinforce in a non-Jewish court that has authority to put real pressure. But on its own, the rabbinical court is pretty limited and doesn't have a lot of leverage to deal with that. So I'm going to bring you in the first simanim, the siman aleph of Choshen Mishpat. So as you know, the Shulchan Aruch was made up of 4 volumes. Orach Chaim deals with whatever common day-to-day basic rules, dinim of Netilat Yadayim, Shabbos, Moadim, everything you find there. You have Yesteryear, which is dealing with complicated stuff, very technical, rules of kashrut, how to kosherize the meat, how to slaughter an animal, nedarim, kivud avayim, all kind of stuff. And there's a very important volume called Choshen Mishpat, which deals with the rules of business. And in there, the first 28 chapters are just dealing with the organization of the court nowadays. Okay? So look what the Shulchan Aruch writes. So the Shulchan Aruch writes in Saif Aleph the following. He says, Bizman hazeh, during this time nowadays, in the exile, we don't have like a full authority when it comes to the judicial system. Danim hadayanim dine hodaot vehalvaot. The dayanim could deal with cases of matter of loans and business matter. Ktuvat isha, anything that has to do with the rules of collecting the ketuvah, the rules of marriages and wedding. Yerushat means laws of inheritance. Matanot, when you give as a gift something to someone and you want it to be a legal donation, the way it goes. Mazik mamon b'chavero, and also cases where you have monetary damages one to the other. Shem advarim hametzuyim tamid veyesh bahem chisaron kis. So remember this expression because it's a key expression in the entire chapter here. 2 conditions. It has to be a case which is matsui tamid. Matsui tamid means it's very common. Something that you're going to find in any time, in any society. And also, yesh bahem chisaron kis. Things that you have like a monetary loss if you do not deal with them. So they established right away, for a reason that I'm going to explain you in a few minutes, that we're already limited because of the exile and because we don't have a proper authority to deal with this, even though, again, we went back to Eretz Israel. It's true, it's a miracle on its own. But we didn't went back to a court or a rabbinical court system or a Sanhedrin system. We have a same kind of judicial system that you're going to find in any democratic and Western country. A Supreme Court, a way of judges that are being nominated through a democratic process and that's the way it's working there. But yet in Eretz Israel and in some, believe it or not, in some Muslim countries where it used to be like huge community that were there, sometimes it happened that the local authority or the king of that moment was giving like either a full, total independence to the dayanim to deal with their own matters of their community, or sometimes, like in Eretz Israel, they were limiting it only to rules of divorces, the gitim, and cases of handling the ketuvot and anything that has to do with marriages in general. So in here, 2 conditions. If what we're dealing with is matsui tamid, very common, and if you're dealing with something where you have a loss, a monetary loss, then the court will deal with it. And the Shulchan Aruch goes on and says, Aval dvarim she'enam mitzuim, but things that are not very common. Afal pi sheyesh bahem chisaron kis, even though you have for sure like a kind of monetary loss that will be associated to the cases. So he gives an example. Behema shechabla bechaverta, the animal of someone, the cow of someone that damages the cow of the neighbor, for example. There's definitely a loss here. Okay, broke the leg. I cannot use the cow for plowing or whatever it is. But it's not very common that two cows are having an argument. Okay. Or if you're dealing with a matter that doesn't have a lot of monetary loss, but it's pretty common, even though it's common, if there's no monetary loss, the court won't deal with that. Interesting. So, how come we did it in that way? How come it was done in that way? Even though, again, in some countries, it was possible, and in a certain period of time. I remember, for example, a Dayan in Morocco called, his name was Rabbi Shimon Suissa, that was his name. And he told me that in the beginning of the 21st century, before the independence, the rabbinical court had total authority to deal with anything with the community. Meaning that without going to a non-Jewish court, if someone refused to give a get, for example, for any reason, well, the rabbis had authority to put him in jail in a Muslim country. People were going there. If they had any monetary issue or payment of a loan that was, that failed or whatever it is, the Dayanim were able to deal with it, and they had full authority even to send people to jail. It's pretty rare. In Poland, I know that in a certain time it was like this, and it changed a little bit. Nowadays in Morocco, it's basically like in Eretz Israel. The Moroccan government gave authority to the Dayanim just to deal with cases of divorces and cases of handling the Ktuvot. But even like monetary issue or everything, unless the two parts are signing a document that they agree and they will follow the decision of the Rabbanim and the Dayanim, the court is like, doesn't have that much leverage. But what's interesting here is that the Shulchan Aruch speaks about a scenario that even if you had an agreement with the local authority to do whatever you wanted, still you were restricted to not to deal with certain things. For example, a behemah that damages another behemah, no such a thing. They didn't have they couldn't handle such a case. Or knasot. I'm sure you're familiar with what the word knas means. There are two types of monetary issues that you could find in a rabbinical court. You have a case that we call mammon, is when really a damage was done, a proper calculation of whatever the damage was and is, and then you have like a trial and you have like a court case to find out who's going to pay, who's liable, and if the full amount should be paid or not. You have another concept called knasot. So knasot, there's two categories. There are knasot, knas means a fine. The fine means it's a penalty. It's not mammon. It's not something that you owe because you destroyed it. It's as if it's a pedagogical approach in a certain way that the Torah wants you to pay extra attention and fines you when you do certain things that are totally deviant. So you have some fines that are written in the Torah. For example, if you hit one of your workers, there's a fine that's if there's a case of sexual abuse, there's also fines that are calculated by Torah law for that. And there's other cases that we call knasim de Rabbanan. So that is not something that you're going to find in the Bible, in the Torah, the books of Moshe Rabbeinu, but it's something that you're going to find in Halacha or in the Talmud. Many of them, they're written there. And it's basically a group of Rabbanim in a certain moment of time because of a certain need or a certain struggle that the society was going through during that moment. They decided to make such a penalty for stopping certain deviant behavior. Okay? So nowadays we're not supposed to handle such a thing. We cannot judge such a thing. And the Shulchan Aruch explains an interesting point here, and he says, for example, he says that when you're dealing with anything where you're going to charge the person more than whatever he destroyed, so it looks like it's a penalty that you're adding an extra payment in order to reinforce the law. He says something very interesting. En danin oto ela mumchin asemuchin be'eretz Israel. You need two conditions. You need a mumche, means an expert, a top judge, versed in kimat all the areas and all the topics that you're going to find in halacha. And you have someone that should have a smicha from Eretz Israel. Smicha, as you know, I call it the rabbinical diploma, but it's a very vulgar way to call it. But smicha is something pretty interesting that there's a lot of references about it. And if you have someone that musmach, meaning that he has a rabbinical ordination that was given in Eretz Israel, and we're going to see why in Eretz Israel is different than whatever you're going to find outside of Eretz Israel, then they could handle certain cases. But otherwise, a Beit Din outside of Eretz Israel, or someone that doesn't have a smicha that comes from Eretz Israel, cannot deal with that.
So, I have a question. So
Yes.
Why were these cases, why is that outside of the jurisdiction of the Beit Din?
So we explained, we just came with the third reason, but in the beginning of that halacha, the Shulchan Aruch said that it needs to be a common case, a very common case in society, and it needs also to be a case where there's like a certain monetary loss. But one and not the other is not sufficient.
Right, but if there is what that falls within the jurisdiction of the Beit Din, why is it making the distinction between what they can adjudicate and what they can't adjudicate? Meaning, why can't they just treat all cases?
Okay, so you have to be patient. You're going a little bit fast. That was my next point. Give me just 2-3 minutes. I'm gonna touch that point, and you will answer your question.
Thank you.
Now, another case in halacha bet. Adam shechaval b'chavero, someone that damaged physically someone else. He hit him, broke a bone, whatever it is, broke his nose. Again, it has to be a dayan that's musmach in Eretz Israel and a mumche. Otherwise, you cannot deal with that. Even though, as you know, there's 5 things that when there's a physical damage that someone has to pay. Okay, 5 things. You have to pay what we call shevet, which is the loss of income because you cannot work. Ripu is the medical treatment. It's very interesting. There's boshet, the shame that you went through when you got hit by that person. There's a way also to calculate what we call the pain that you endure when you actually got the hit. And then at the end of it, there's the nezek. The nezek is whatever loss happened to you. Right now, let's say you cannot use your left arm for, 6 months. There's a way to calculate the kind of loss that it could occur for you and for everyone else for your family and for your incomes in general. So those cases also cannot be dealt unless you're dealing with someone which is mumche in Eretz Israel. It's not possible. There's another case, very interesting here. It's actually there's a lot of literature about this. It's called garmi. So I don't know if you heard about this. It's an interesting idea. There's a concept in Nizikin, in damages, called grama. Grama it's a chidush, it's an innovation by Torah law, that if you do a damage to someone in a total indirect way, totally not in a direct way, the court cannot force you to pay. Hashem is waiting for you to pay because it's ethical to deal with that and to deal with it properly. But the court had no leverage to force a payment on you. There's a gray zone called garmi. So garmi is it's cases that are pretty unusual, but it's someone that does a damage a little bit more than indirect damage. I'll give you an example. He takes, let's say, a shtar, like a contract, that you could use to collect a certain debt or a loan that you give to someone, and he burns it. So according to strict rock bottom halacha, he owes the guy $2 because this is what he damaged. It's a piece of paper, but really the value of that piece of paper might be $10,000, but he burnt it. So there's a huge argument in the Talmud. Do we prosecute such cases? Do we deal with such cases or no? and it's pretty rare, but the halacha is like Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes, which is very rare. Most of the time the halacha is never like him. There's only 2 cases where it's like him, and one of them is Danin Dine de Garmi. So we deal with cases where you're dealing with gray zones like this. So here the same. Dine de Garmi vechen hamoser le'ansin, Danin oto dayanim she'enam smuchim be'eretz Yisrael. Here there's an exception. It's possible to deal with those kind of cases even though you're not dealing with someone that's musmach from Eretz Yisrael. And moser le'anasim, it's very unfortunate, but it's someone that denounces a Jewish person to the authority, and because he does that, the guy is going to go either to jail or he's going to have like a requisition of all kind of position he has, and the authority will never figure out such a thing if it wasn't for the guy that denounced him. So it's categorized in Garmi as well. A Moser, someone that denounces someone else, which is a terrible thing to do, is categorized by in Halacha by Garmi. So let's now deal with your question. How come there's differences like this? And what is exactly this concept of smicha? How does that work? And why is it so important? So if I ask you what smicha is, have you ever heard smicha in Psukim? Yeah. You have that in? Exactly. When the Kohen Gadol was doing a vidui, for example, for Yom Kippurim, he was doing a smicha on the korban. He was putting his 2 hands and he was repenting. He was saying he was doing a vidui for all the Kohanim and all the Klal Yisrael. Someone that brings a korban chatat. Let's say someone was transgressed Shabbat by mistake. It was a mistake. It was b'shogeg, and it was done unwillingly. So the person has to bring in the Beit HaMikdash a korban chatat, and he has to do tshuva for that. There was a protocol called smicha also, that he had to put his 2 hands on the head of the animal, and he had to make a vidui and the tshuva for whatever he did. And then the korban was working. Without the smicha, without the proper tshuva, the korban is not doing the job. Moshe and Yoshua.
It's smicha.
Exactly. And it's very interesting. I didn't expect someone to know that, by the way, and to make the connection. But I'm going to show you a very, very important sefer in the Ashkenazi world. He was one of the Gdoilei Aposkim before the Mishnah Berurah, Rabbi Michael Yechiel Epstein. He's called the Baal Aruch HaShulchan. It's a great, great sefer to have, especially for Rabbanim, because it's a great cheating book. Great. Each time you're looking for a quick answer, you want to understand the quick concept and to have the essential idea of whatever you're looking for, he does a tremendous job. In fact, he called it Aruch HaShulchan because he does the total different protocol than what the Shulchan Aruch does. Basically, that book is able not only to give you what to do on the ground, halacha lemase, what to follow, but he's able to track down back every kind of halacha back in its primary resource in the Talmud. So I'm going to show you what he says about this idea of smicha, and he explained it in the best and clearest way possible. We're going to read the whole text together just for you to understand that idea. So look in here. Mitzvat aseh min haTorah limnot dayanim. You have a mitzvat aseh min haTorah to appoint judges and to have a judicial system in society. Shene'emar, because it says, Shoftim ve'shotchim titen lecha. It's a parasha in Dvarim. Ve'hem tzrichim lihiyot musmachim be'eretz Yisrael. They need to be properly trained in Eretz Yisrael. Dafka, especially in Eretz Yisrael. And what does that mean, smicha? So he explains, Hainu sheshelosha chachamim, that you need 3 sages, 3 Torah scholars, ve'echad mehem samuch, that one of them had also the smicha. Kesheroim chachai haraui ladun, when they see a Torah scholar that could handle that position, and that could be a more halacha. Lehorot means that he could answer any kind of question you ask him. Somchim oto, we could appoint him as a judge. Vekorim lo rabbi, and we call him rabbi. Now that's for you, doctor. Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom al pi tzivui HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe Rabbeinu, because of the order and the commandment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, samach et Yoshua. He did the same to Yoshua. ואת 7 זקנים, and the 70 זקנים, the 70 judges that were with him, and those 70 זקנים knew what they did. סמכו לאחרים, they also appointed other people, ואחרים לאחרים, and one to the other, and you initiated a cycle and a long, very long chain. נמצחו דכל הנסמכים, listen to what he says, הם כאילו נסמכו ממשה רבנו מפי הגבורה. It's as if when the smicha was applicable, we were able to go back, and it's as if Moshe Rabbeinu appointed those judges, because there was no break, and the shalshelet, like we say in Hebrew, the chain, continued from the time it started by Moshe Rabbeinu and Yeshua till recent dayanim of those societies. בעוונותינו מגודל הפיזור שנתפזרנו בארבע כנפות הארץ. And unfortunately, because of the exile, and we went scattered all over the planet, בטלה השמיכה. The smicha was lost because there was break now. We had we couldn't continue, and we couldn't keep up with that. And what happened was, I'm sorry, I just opened the window by mistake. ודייננו כהדיוטים, and our dayanim nowadays, they're not labeled, they're not considered, they don't have a status of mumchim. They're like ordinary dayanim, we call them. Hediotim means that they could handle certain cases, but it's not like a judge in the Supreme Court, if you had to make a comparison with a regular judge.
Because they don't have the direct smicha, the direct lineage.
Exactly, and because of that, their leverage got a little bit lowered, and all the rules that I showed you in the beginning that had to do with cases that they could handle, they can't handle, well, it's coming because of that. The minute we lost the traditional shalsheret back, that was able to track it down back to Moshe Rabbeinu, the whole ruling changed.
Was it Rabbi Akiva was the last one, or it went past him?
Oof. I won't be able to answer that. You have to do some research. I don't know who was the last one. That was the last one. I believe it's the author of the Talmud, Rabbi Chia and Ravashi, maybe. I'm not sure, but I'll double check, and I don't want to say something wrong. I'll get back to you with that. So, what do we do nowadays? So the Aruch HaShulchan is saying something interesting. שאם חס ושלום יתבטלו דיינים מישראל, שיהיה ביכולתם לקוף לדין, תהיה נעילת דלת בפני הלווין, ותתבטל המסחור והנאמנות. If we do not take strong decisions to deal with the exile and all the situation that we have on the platter now, we're going to create chaos in societies. We don't want society not to have any order. We don't want people not to go into a rabbinical court in order to reinforce the law and to have justice being served. So we have to take a decision. So they decided the following. לכן אמרו חכמינו ז"ל, דאב בזמן הזה, even nowadays, שליחותי הוא דקמאי כעבדינן. We are like the shluchim. So shaliach, you know what it is. Shaliach means that you replace someone. There's actually an argument by the Rishonim how to understand that concept. It's either like you're a replique of the person, but you're acting on his behalf, or some are learning that you're almost like an extension of his hand. And therefore, whatever you do, when he appointed you a shaliach, it's as if you did it. So there's two ways to look at it. And the Aruch HaShulchan here is saying that this is how we are able to have bati dinim that deal with certain matters nowadays, because we assume that those dayanim, even though they're not musmach from Eretz Israel, and we lost the shalshelet and the whole transmission of the smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu, we're still, at a certain extent, we're shluchim. Shluchim means that we acting on behalf of those people, and we did that because we didn't take the matter in our own hands. Imagine the chaos that you're going to find in society. So I don't know if that answers your question, but according to this, you know why now we're limited in certain things, is because we assume that if the tradition was not passed on from Moshe Rabbeinu till nowadays, there's going to be a lack of knowledge, there's going to be a lack of experience, and you're going to feel that in the authority of the court and the enforcement of the law of the court. So because of that, they decided to limit the casualties and to say, you know what, There are certain cases that are very common, and they have like a monetary loss associated to them that we could deal with. Even though there is such a rule, I would like to show you a halacha very interesting here. If you go in the chapter 2 of the Shulchan Aruch, which is here, an interesting halacha that not everyone is aware of. Kol bedin afilu enam smuchim be'eretz Yisrael. So it's chapter 2 in the book of Choshen Mishpat. So every rabbinical court, even though they don't have like a tradition that's able to track us back down to Moshe Rabbeinu. Im roim she'am protzim be'averot, if they feel that the society what they're living in is going in all direction and it's hard to handle, Danin, they could deal with any cases they want. But again, it has to be done with the counsel of the sages of that generation. It's not a decision that you could take just like this in a very, like in a solo way, well, I would say. But if there's a need, even cases of Ben Mita Ben Mammon, which is incredible to write such a thing. Even cases that deals with, thank you. Even cases of homicides and criminology kind of stuff, and even Mammon, which is like complicated to deal with, like the fines that we discussed in the beginning of the class. They have authority to decide by decree to deal with them. Of course, providing that the local government will let them deal with that. So basically, this is what we have nowadays. And just to conclude, the Torah was given 3,352 years ago. Okay, be'erech. Okay? So it's prior to Middle Age, Antiquity, and all like the common like era in history and everything. I don't know if we realize that, but if you take a picture of the geopolitical situation of the nations at that time and our way of managing societies that was offered to us by Kadosh Baruch Hu and implanted by Moshe Rabbeinu, I don't know if you realize the gap that we're dealing with here. We're very far from the birth of democracy in Greece, in Athens, and we're like almost 1,500 years before that. What you had in Middle East, in North Africa, and even in European country was barbarian kind of societies. That's what you had. In best case scenario, you had a city-state that was well organized, but there was no democracy, there was no parliament, there was no such a thing. And the law, forget it. I think the word did not even exist in the vocabulary at that time. So imagine, it was pretty, and we came at that time with such a, like, it was a revolution, what we did, when you think about it. And it didn't come from us, obviously. I don't think that a human being will be able to come up and invent and design such a complex and original way to handle societies. But whether we like it or not, they're not going to admit that, obviously. But if you look in history, you will see that many translations of the Talmud were forced upon us, and many important people, like the last one in place was the French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. He came up with the civil code that he wrote on his own, but really was inspired from all the translation that he had. Until nowadays, you have certain rules that you find in non-Jewish systems that are coming from the Torah. It's obvious. I'll give you just an example. Al pishnaim edim yakum davar. You want to start a case in a court, you need 2 witnesses. 1, in some cases only, but 2 is the minimum. You find that in 2 and more, obviously. The same thing applied to anything that you find in a non-Jewish system nowadays. And the reason why we picked up 2 is because we need to be able to contradict the witnesses and to create like justice by being able to comfort them in whatever they're claiming they know. So if you have one guy, well, you're cooked, because how are you gonna contradict that person? But if you have 2, the leverage is a bit, there's a lot of things to do. You enter one, you hear his story, You bring the second one, you could match the things, you could find out contradiction, and believe it or not, sometimes with a little thing, a little detail, you could save the life of someone. There's a case in Maseret Sanhedrin about a rabbi that listened to two witnesses in a different way, in different moment, and one of them gave a slight difference in his testimony than the other one. One of them said that the case and the crime happened under an apple tree, and the other one said under a fig tree. And just because of that, he refused to link the two witnesses. No court case. Acquitté, like they say in French. So sometimes it's important, and sometimes the details that you find in those kind of technical rulings are making the whole difference. But my point was, how proud should we feel that not only we inspired the modern societies with that system, and you would be so surprised what you find in there. Cases about loans, cases about civil situation, what we call in French le droit de la guerre, even the rules of how to conduct war. It's not something like there's rules of that, and everything is written, everything is codified. And we're very lucky, one of our greatest rabbanim that we had in history was able to pick up that from the Yama Talmud, from the ocean of the Talmud, and to codify everything in a book called the Rambam, the Chazakah. So that's basically it. Nowadays, what we have is, in some countries, we're lucky enough to have Jewish rabbinical court that could handle certain things, but we are pretty limited. For example, in Canada, if let's say if there's no prenuptial agreement between a couple, if the husband wants to act in a totally inappropriate way and not giving a get, the bedin here is pretty limited. But if there's an argument between the two parts prior to the ketuvah and to the celebration of the chuppah and the marriage and everything, the rabbinical court could handle this and could create pressure. In Morocco nowadays, in Eretz Israel nowadays, the rabbinical court has full jurisdiction when it comes to that. They could send someone to jail if they could prove that the guy doesn't want to give an act of divorce and it's needed to be given. But in Canada, unless there's a prenuptial agreement, it's very hard to do that. And in some countries, again, in history, it was possible that we had, at a certain point of time, we were able to really deal with a full independence with all cases that pretend to our community, and the authority were fine with that. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah.
Fast forward a day, maybe two.
Yeah.
When we wake up in Yerushalayim and we're transported there in this building, and the Sanhedrin is 50 feet away from us.
Yeah.
Do any of the Sephardim that deal with the halacha in the future talk about how the Beit Din or smicha even from today is converted, transferred, upgraded?
Mashiach is the one that's going to deal with that. The smicha is going to be brought down, and even the nivuah and all the tradition that we have. Even the Mashiach is going to be able to scan you to tell you, tribe Yehuda, you Shimon. There's a lot of things that he's going to be able to do because of Ruach HaKodesh, and because he's going to come from the nivuah is going to come back with him. So it's according to the mystical approach, we know that the Mashiach is like the soul of Moshe Rabbeinu himself. So in books of what we call Sfarim HaKedoshim, like the Zohar and everything, they discuss that. And according to that approach, he's going to reinstill the smicha that he started himself. Because he's the same neshama, basically, just in a different body.
It's noteworthy that in, I think, the 1400s of Yaakov Bey Rav tried to reinstitute the smicha of Moshe Rabbeinu in Tzfat.
Yeah.
And he was unsuccessful, but it was going on for a certain amount of years that they considered it having been reinstituted. And it's a whole chapter in history.
Yeah, it's a whole. But again, it was not it was not accepted by all the communities. But we even have the Aruch HaShulchan himself has another book that he wrote. It's called Aruch HaShulchan HaAtid, and he deals with all those things. It's pretty interesting. Very soft to read. And it's
and
a
he
must.
speaks about the Beit Din
I believe so, but I won't be able to tell you offhand
That's what
exactly
I'm
what.
understanding. If somehow there's a path from what we have currently to future, or whether what we have today that's the end, and we begin anew in a different way.
Rabbis all have to become doctors.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהכל
We'll get them
נהיה.
all honorary doctorates.
If we look at what you have up on the screen.
Yeah.
About if there was this situation of dispersion and all that. So that means there doesn't have to be an agreement. If it's specific to a certain community.
Yeah, but you need all the sages to be put together to decide that listen, there's a problem here. We're dealing with. I'll give you an example. Last century, it happened in the 50s. Televisions. When television started, there was a decree by all the rabbanim worldwide. Television shouldn't be in a Jewish home. Okay, did we listen? Didn't listen? It's a different story, but they came up with a rabbinical decree because of that. Look what happened just 10 years ago in the United States. They rented like a huge stadium. They dealt with the internet. And how is it important to put filters and all the dangers and everything. It falls in that category. Whenever there's like decrees that are not written anywhere, and here it says more, even if you're dealing with like cases with like violent crime in society, even though you don't have jurisdiction usually or any kind of leverage to handle those cases, if there's a need and all the council of sages of that area decides that we go with that, then we go with it. It's possible.
But then you're setting up a system that there's never going to be an agreement.
No, because first of all, it's pretty rare that all the Jews get in agreement. And also, again, it has to be like a real particular situation. It has to be that there's a real problem here. There's like it becomes violent, and there's the Goyish system is not helping us because it doesn't take care of this and that. We have to do something about it.
But why then, in everything else, we're saying 50 plus 1? But in this, it sounds as if it needs to be a big majority.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the local rabbis of that particular society, whoever they are and whoever is in charge, like the gvirim that you have, and the important people of that society and that community, they will decide if they could do that. I assume also that if such a case happened, they're gonna seek like the haskamot of the big poiskim in Eretz Israel, from the Sepharade, Hasidic, and Ashkenazi world to give haskamot on whatever they try to do, and that's the way it's being done. But it's a special situation. It happened in history, but it's a special situation. Otherwise, the mainstream protocol that we have is we deal with certain things that are falling under our jurisdiction. Yes. Yeah.
So what does it deal with?
So nowadays, you could deal with all kind of things that has to do with business issues, and there's no limit when it comes to money, like la cour des petites créances that you find in the non-Jewish system. And basically, it goes just with one. There are some people, like in business that happen to have like a disagreement. They go to the rabbinical court, and if they want to make sure that whatever decision is and ruling being issued by the Beit Din of Montreal is being reinforced as a law, they sign a paper before, the two parts. Whatever the Dayanim are saying is law for you and me. Therefore, if it doesn't fit with les attentes of one of the parts, the other one could take that paper and go back to a non-Jewish court, and it will be reinforced as law because we have a signed agreement that we agree on that. But otherwise, they're a little bit limited. Even when it comes to, like I told you, with cases of igunim, where like someone doesn't want to give a get. But they're very clever, and they could do a lot of things in order to reinforce. I'll give you just a story that happened in here.
I heard that
Again,
that the
I'm sorry?
rabbis hire people to beat these guys up.
That comes from Rambam. Okay, but we can't say that in public, obviously. That comes from Rambam. You're not Sepharade. What's happening to you? You want to hit everyone? There's a case that happened in Montreal where he was ordered by not the Beit Din, but by a Hasidic rabbi that it was just too much. But usually they have much more pacifist kind of method that they could use. For example, there's a case that happened just 10 years ago. A woman that couldn't get her act of divorce, her get. The Beit Din couldn't do anything because there was no prenuptial kind of, and they tried to apply pressure by excommunicating the guy and doing all kind of things. Didn't help. One of the Dayanim that was very clever told the lady, Might work, but if it does, you're gonna have your get within hours, I guarantee you. So what he did, he told her to call her ex-husband and to tell him that she's leaving the country, that he's never gonna see his kid. And she actually took tickets and she took her kids to Eretz Israel, but her plan was to stay maybe 2 weeks. They were hoping for the husband to come in Eretz Israel. And he did. He didn't see it coming. The minute he went through the borders and they saw him because they complained that such a person doesn't want to give a get. So they knew they had him in list. The minute he entered the country, they picked up the passport, they sent him to jail, and the get was written 3 days after. But again, it's not by law. It's like tactics that they could use in order to do that. But they have pretty good ideas when it comes to that.
I know-
But it's something that was done.
I heard of a case of a man stayed in jail in Israel
Yeah.
until he died. He would not give away for that.
Well, there's all kind of sickness. What should I tell you? Sometimes people are like
So that thing,
blinded with the.
but that thing didn't work.
It's possible. It's possible. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes even the bidding and excommunication. Excommunication is pretty chamor. Like you cannot talk to people of the community. No one does business with you. Like you walk on the sideway, everyone goes to the other side of the world. They cannot deal with you at all. It's pretty lonely. But they're trying to isolate the person for him to. But sometimes it doesn't work. So each case is different.
I think the original Beit Din, that the Beit Din would beat him until he gives it. So
Are there exceptions? Are there any Bate Din around the world that
Yeah.
for some reason or another do more?
In Morocco nowadays,
And why?
because that's the authority.
Because they were given the.
Because they were giving that leverage from the authority. They used to have like
From the
the
local
Jews in
authority,
Poland,
from the
and
local.
they're nowadays. I know someone, Diane in Morocco, that he sent many people in jail because they didn't want to give it.
But that's.
And let me tell you, the jail that you have in Morocco is not the Mediterranean club 5 stars. Trust me, you want to write it before even you enter the door.
But that's because the local authority let them, not because they have some mumche or they have some other.
No. That, even if you're not mumche, you're allowed to deal with that. We saw that in the first
But there
halakha
are
that I
other
showed you.
exceptions as to Bate Din that for.
No, that has to do with the authority. If the
Okay.
authority let you do that, in Eretz Israel, that's the same case.
Yeah.
In Eretz Israel, they let you deal with that. But you cannot do that for any other questions?
I would like to see the halakhic authorities in the world get together and find another halakhic system so that we don't have.
That's next week's.
Listen, it's a whole different shiur and topic to understand the dynamic of that rule. How come it's it sounds even unfair a little bit when you look at and you could see definitely that there's going to be a lot of abuses, and there were in history because of that rule. But we have to dive inside the mind of Moshe Rabbeinu, and if I could kaviyachol speak like this, into the intellect of Hashem, why he made up that rule in that way. But we have ways to deal with that, and it's working. It's happening sometimes. So it can be like a lot of different type of pressures that you could apply to the person that doesn't want to give, and sometimes it could even end up like in pretty tragic ways. There's a story that happened in Montreal here. I think it was like 15 years ago. A guy that was like behaving totally inappropriate when it comes to that. He didn't want to give a get to his wife, and the family was a mother's family. He asked them $200,000 to give the get. So the poor parents had to go take a loan, sell all kind of jewelry that they had, and all kind of things. Finally, he comes to the Bedin, and he's about to sign, and he says, "I'm not going to do it. I want the double of the amount." So one of the Dayanim got extremely frustrated, and he got up and he told the man, "You're playing with fire. Well, you're threatening me." He said, "I'm not threatening you. I'm just warning you, but this is terrible what you're doing. And I wish that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to have mercy on you." "Oh, you're threatening." So he told him, "I'm going to tell you what the Mishnah says, and you decide what to do." The Mishnah says that there's 2 ways for a woman to get remarried. It's either you give her a get, or the husband passes away. "Oh, you're threatening me." Believe it or not, the guy slept in the stairs outside of the Bedin. He broke his neck and he died on the spot. Getting out, all upset from the Bedin. Again, This is like a wild kind of pressure. This is Mina Shamayim. But you would be very surprised. We have a Dayan Emet here. The Yesteryear is not playing around with justice. And whoever decides to find loopholes in the system and to abuse a certain position that he was given by biblical law, there's always a bill that bounces back. We know that Hashem takes care of that usually. We wish that he doesn't go into such an extreme case, but we trust him. Anything else? All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.